He was Abraham's firstborn, yet most forget his name. Before Isaac, there was Ishmael, and his story will change how you see the Bible forever. Was he rejected by God, or chosen for a different purpose? Ishmael's destiny wasn't an accident, it was a divine design. God promised Abraham a great nation through Ishmael. So, why was he sent away? The answer is buried in pain, prophecy, and purpose. If you love Jesus or you're curious about the Bible, hit like, share with someone, and subscribe now to the Bible stories. Let's uncover the truth together. Ishmael's story begins not with joy, but with tension. Sarai, Abraham's wife, was barren and desperate for a child. In her impatience, she offered her servant, Hagar, to Abraham. This act wasn't just personal, it would shape nations. From this union came Ishmael, a child born of a promise twisted by human hands. Hagar didn't choose this destiny. As a servant, she had no voice in the decision that would define her life. Yet through her, a child would be born, not cursed, but called. Still, tension brewed between her and Sarai. Hagar's obedience would lead her into suffering and eventually exile. After fleeing Sarai's harsh treatment, Hagar found herself alone in the wilderness, pregnant and hopeless. But then a divine encounter. An angel of the Lord appeared, calling her by name, something no one else had done. "Return," the angel said, "for your son will be a wild man, and his descendants will be countless." When Hagar returned, she gave birth to a son and named him Ishmael, meaning God hears. This name wasn't random. It was a declaration. In a world where servants were invisible, God heard her. Ishmael's name was a reminder that even in rejection and wilderness, heaven is listening. For 13 years, Ishmael was Abraham's only son, his pride and joy. He taught him how to build altars, herd flocks, and worship the God of heaven. To Abraham, Ishmael wasn't just a son. He was the fulfillment of God's promise, or so he thought. But destiny was about to shift. When Abraham was 99, God appeared and made a new, shocking promise. Sarai, now Sarah, would bear a son. Abraham laughed. How could a 90-year-old woman give birth? "Yes," God said, "and you shall call him Isaac." Ishmael's future was suddenly uncertain. With Isaac's birth, the house changed. What once was Ishmael's alone, now he had to share. But not equally. Tension between Sarah and Hagar grew. Ishmael, once the heir, was now treated as the other son. The quiet jealousy of a boy pushed aside would soon explode into open conflict. Years later, at a feast celebrating Isaac's weaning, Ishmael laughed, perhaps out of playfulness, perhaps out of bitterness. But Sarah saw it differently. She demanded Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. One moment of laughter, and the family shattered. Abraham was heartbroken. How could he cast out his own son? Ishmael wasn't a mistake. He was his blood, his firstborn. But God spoke, saying, "Do not be distressed. Through Isaac your lineage will be named, but I will also make Ishmael into a great nation." Abraham obeyed, heart heavy with sorrow. With nothing but water and bread, Hagar and Ishmael wandered into the wilderness of Beersheba. The sun blazed. Water ran out. Ishmael, now weak, collapsed. Hagar could not bear to watch him die, so she left him under a bush and wept, hopeless, forgotten but not by God. Then from heaven a voice. "Do not be afraid," the angel said, "for God has heard the boy crying." Just like before, when she was pregnant and alone, heaven spoke. God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well. Ishmael lived, because God remembered his promise. Ishmael grew up in the desert, becoming a skilled archer, a man of survival, independence, and quiet strength. Though far from Abraham's tents, Ishmael was watched over by God. He wasn't the son of the covenant, but he was still a son of purpose. Hagar, still Egyptian by heart, found a wife for Ishmael from her homeland. Ishmael began his own family, and from him would come 12 sons, rulers of tribes, fathers of nations. The prophecy God spoke over him began to unfold. Quietly, in the shadow of Isaac's spotlight. Scripture is silent on whether Abraham ever visited Ishmael again. But the ache must have stayed with him. 2 sons, 2 destinies, 1 torn father. Yet despite the silence, Ishmael remained in God's sight, never forgotten, never abandoned. God's promise to Ishmael didn't stop at survival. He became the father of 12 princes, tribal leaders whose descendants would stretch across Arabia. Though not part of Israel's covenant, Ishmael's line would shape empires and echo through prophecy. When Abraham died, something miraculous happened. Isaac and Ishmael came together. In the silence of grief, the brothers reunited to bury their father. No words are recorded, but their shared presence was enough. It was a moment of peace between promises. Though Isaac and Ishmael shared the same father, their destinies diverged like rivers flowing opposite ways. Isaac's line would lead to Israel, covenant, and Messiah. Ishmael's would lead to the vast Arab world, powerful, wild, and free. Together, they carried Abraham's legacy in 2 directions, both shaped by divine design. When the angel spoke of Ishmael, he said, "He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him." Many misunderstood this as a curse. But in truth, it was a prophecy of independence. Ishmael would not bow, nor would he be broken. Centuries later, Ishmael would become central to Islamic belief. In Islamic tradition, it was Ishmael, not Isaac, who was nearly sacrificed. Whether or not this is biblically accurate, it proves one thing: Ishmael's legacy lived on, powerful and undeniable, across nations and religions. While Isaac was celebrated, Ishmael was often forgotten, in sermons, in songs, in stories. Yet God never forgot him. From the moment he called Hagar by name to the water in the wilderness, God proved, no life is too far for his mercy. Ishmael fathered 12 sons, Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam. Each would go on to establish tribes that dominated parts of Arabia. These weren't forgotten names. From them came cities, cultures, and power. Ishmael's line would thunder across history like distant drums. One of Ishmael's sons, Kedar, became known for black tents and mighty warriors. Even the Bible mentions Kedar's archers as fierce and skilled. From Ishmael's wilderness came not weakness, but strength. His descendants would become known for war, wealth, and wisdom. Ishmael's life reminds us of something sacred. Even if the world rejects you, God sees you. He heard Hagar's cries. He protected Ishmael in the desert. He kept his word. In a time when lineage meant everything, God honored the outcast. His faithfulness runs deeper than human plans. Just like Abraham was the father of many nations, Ishmael became a father of tribes, a leader whose name echoed through deserts. His legacy isn't in a temple or a city, but in people in nations that still remember their roots today. Ishmael lived between promises, not quite the chosen line, yet never outside of God's plan. He belonged to Abraham, but his path was wild, free, and solitary. And yet, his life whispers a truth we often miss. God's grace reaches even in the wilderness. While Isaac's story is studied and preached, Ishmael's is often passed over. But what if we've missed something? What if the son we forgot was meant to teach us about survival, rejection, and divine mercy? Ishmael's life is not a side note. It's a mirror of grace in the margins. Before he was even born, Ishmael was named by an angel. "You shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction." His name literally means God hears. Every time Hagar called out to her son, she was speaking a testimony. God hears. His entire life was marked by this truth, that in the wilderness, in silence, in rejection, God still listens. After Isaac was born, Abraham didn't forget Ishmael. In fact, long before Isaac came, Abraham had prayed, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." These weren't the words of a careless father. They were the cry of a man who loved his son deeply. Even after the separation, Abraham's heart remained tethered to Ishmael, in memory, in pain, and in prayer. We often forget. Hagar was the first woman in the Bible whom God directly speaks to by name. Not Sarah, not Rebecca, but Hagar, a servant and a foreigner. And it was because of Ishmael. Through this bond, Hagar becomes a symbol of God's care for those pushed aside, and Ishmael becomes a symbol of the legacy birthed through mercy. Ishmael didn't grow up with comfort or inheritance. He learned to live off the land, to endure heat and hunger, to become a man in a place most children would perish. He became tough, but not hard-hearted. He knew loss early, and that shaped his strength. Ishmael's manhood wasn't forged in tents, but under open skies and survival. That desert well wasn't just water, it was life. It represented God's promise. You will not die here. You have a future. Ishmael drank from a miracle. The well in the wilderness became a turning point, where despair met divine provision. And sometimes, all it takes is one well to change an entire destiny. Much of Ishmael's strength came from Hagar, a mother who raised him alone in exile, a woman who walked through rejection with her head high. Hagar's courage became Ishmael's legacy. She taught him more than survival. She taught him faith when the world was silent. That strength carried into the 12 princes he would father. Though God's covenant would pass through Isaac, his compassion remained on Ishmael. This wasn't favoritism, it was faithfulness. Ishmael's story proves that God's care is not limited to covenant. He watches the rejected. He blesses the outside camp. Even when history forgets you, heaven remembers your name. Not once, but twice, God sent an angel to Hagar and Ishmael. Once when she fled pregnant. Again when they faced death. Both times, the message was clear. Do not fear. In Scripture, few receive 2 angelic visits. This tells us something important. Ishmael wasn't just noticed. He was chosen to survive for a reason. The Bible gives few details about Ishmael's later life. He lived 137 years, but where he journeyed, how he ruled, remains a mystery. But perhaps that's the beauty. His story was never about spotlight, it was about survival, legacy, and unseen greatness. From Ishmael's line came peoples who shaped regions, wars, and cultures. Some of his descendants are still remembered in modern Arab traditions. His story didn't end at the edge of Scripture. It continued across history. And just like the well God opened, his legacy flowed far and wide. Though born of the same father, Ishmael and Isaac walked very different paths. One was born of a servant, the other of promise. But for a time, they played together, laughed together, grew side by side. What dreams did Ishmael carry before separation? We often forget. He wasn't just a rival. He was a brother first. On the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham threw a feast. The tents were filled with joy, but for Sarah, something else stirred. She saw Ishmael laughing, mocking perhaps, or maybe just misunderstood. That single moment changed everything. It was the beginning of exile, the turning point in Ishmael's story. Cast out this bondwoman and her son, Sarah declared to Abraham. It was a moment filled with pain. For Abraham, it meant tearing his heart in two. For Ishmael, it meant rejection. This wasn't just about family drama, it was a divine transition. God was about to lead Ishmael into his own destiny, away from Isaac's shadow. Before Hagar and Ishmael left, Abraham gave them bread and water. No army, no escort, just provisions and a final glance. Imagine his thoughts. Was this the last time he'd see his firstborn? His trembling hands gave more than supplies. They gave a father's silent blessing. A goodbye carved with love. As Hagar and Ishmael walked into the wilderness, every step took them farther from everything familiar. The land was dry, the sun merciless. What were Hagar's prayers? What were Ishmael's fears? Exile was not just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. Yet even here, God was already waiting. Eventually, the water Abraham gave them ran out. Hagar placed her son under a bush, unable to watch him die. "Let me not see the death of the boy," she cried. In that moment of total despair, the silence of the desert was broken, not by thunder, but by the voice of an angel. "Fear not," the angel said, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Ishmael didn't speak aloud, yet heaven heard. That one line confirms everything about Ishmael's identity. He was not forgotten. His cry, even in weakness, was sacred. And God answered not with judgment, but rescue. And then, God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well. It wasn't created in that moment, it was always there. Sometimes, it takes divine vision to see what's hidden in plain sight. The well was not just water, it was hope, future, survival. Ishmael would drink, and live to fulfill his calling. After the rescue, Ishmael stayed in the wilderness and grew strong. Scripture says he became an archer, a skilled hunter. He wasn't raised in comfort, but in challenge. Every arrow he launched told the world, I survived. He was no longer the castaway boy, he was a man with purpose. Hagar, still Egyptian by heritage, found a wife for Ishmael from her homeland. She chose someone who would understand wilderness, hardship, survival. From this union, 12 sons would be born, 12 princes. Ishmael's legacy was not just continued, it was multiplied. From Ishmael came 12 sons, each becoming a prince, each forming a great tribe. These weren't just scattered descendants, they were leaders of nations. Names like Nebajoth, Kedar, and Mibsam carved themselves into the fabric of history. God had promised Hagar that her son would become a mighty nation, and now, that promise was unfolding across the deserts. Ishmael, once cast out, now stood as the father of kings, fulfilling a destiny written in divine words. The sons of Ishmael didn't fade into history. They became the roots of many Arab tribes, with their names echoing through ancient maps and scriptures. Kedar, for example, became a powerful desert tribe mentioned even in the Psalms and Isaiah. These descendants would influence trade, culture, and warfare across the Middle East. And though their father had been exiled, they carried his spirit, strong, independent, and deeply connected to the land. When the angel spoke to Hagar in the wilderness, he described Ishmael in a strange but powerful way. He shall be a wild man, his hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. At first glance, it seems harsh, but in truth, it speaks of fierce independence. Ishmael would not be ruled. He would carve his own path, survive any hardship, and stand as a symbol of resilience in the face of rejection. While Isaac inherited the covenant of promise, Ishmael was not forgotten. God blessed him separately, a parallel promise. I will make him fruitful. I will make him a great nation, the Lord said. So while Isaac's descendants would carry the messianic line, Ishmael's would grow vast in number and influence. Both sons mattered. Both were part of Abraham's divine story. And both would change the world in their own way. Despite the years, the distance, and the pain, Ishmael returned. When Abraham died, both Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury their father. Imagine the silence at that grave. Two brothers, once divided by fate, now united by grief. No words recorded, just the act of burying a shared legacy. It reminds us that no matter the paths we walk, family and faith have the power to bring us back together. For centuries, Ishmael has been left out of many stories. Misunderstood, even blamed. But God never forgot him. From the moment he cried under that bush, to the day his sons ruled deserts, Ishmael remained in God's narrative. He was never a mistake, he was a miracle in the margins. His life proves one thing: being forgotten by men does not mean being forgotten by heaven. Ishmael's descendants shaped history, not just through tribes, but through faith. Many scholars link his lineage to major civilizations and even spiritual traditions. While the Bible focuses on Isaac's line toward Jesus, Ishmael's line influenced nations far beyond Israel. His legacy reminds us, God writes with both bold letters and hidden ink. Ishmael was one of those quiet ink lines, powerful, purposeful, and deeply divine. Though Jesus never mentions Ishmael directly, his compassion echoed what Ishmael's story needed most: dignity, inclusion, and mercy. Jesus reached out to the forgotten, the cast out, just like Hagar and her son. Every time Christ spoke to the marginalized, he echoed the heart of God, who saw the boy under the bush. Ishmael's story may be ancient, but its heartbeat matches the gospel. Haven't we all felt rejected, cast aside, overlooked? Ishmael's story connects because it's human. We all wander. We all cry under our own trees. And just like God heard Ishmael's silent tears, he hears ours. This isn't just a Bible story, it's a mirror. Ishmael shows us that God's love finds us even when we're furthest from the promise. Today, the descendants of Ishmael span continents, languages, and cultures. His blood flows through nations, his story still whispered in deserts and echoed in hearts. From rejection came revival. From wilderness came a nation. Ishmael may have been the forgotten son in man's story, but in God's story, he was unforgettable. Did you know Ishmael is one of the few people in the Bible whose name was chosen directly by God? Before he was even born, the angel told Hagar, "You shall name him Ishmael," which means God hears. That's powerful. His very name was a promise, a reminder that no matter how far you go or how alone you feel, God is listening. And in a moment of fear and exile, God sealed that truth into Ishmael's identity forever. Growing up without a home, raised in the wild, no palace, no safety net. And yet, Ishmael survived. More than survived, he thrived. The wilderness shaped him into a leader, a hunter, a survivor. He learned to rely on God, to navigate danger, and to protect his family. His strength wasn't handed to him, it was earned through struggle. That's the part of Ishmael's story we often forget, the quiet power of resilience. The story of Hagar and Ishmael is not just historical, it's deeply personal. It's about single mothers doing everything they can. It's about children growing up in uncertainty. And it's about a God who steps into broken situations. From their journey, we learn that even when the world pushes you out, heaven pulls you close. Their faith, though tested in the desert, became a beacon of hope for everyone who's ever been left behind. Hagar called God El Roi, the God who sees me. That moment changed everything. It was in the desert, when she thought no one noticed, that God showed up. Ishmael's entire life would be shaped by that name. Because when you know you're seen by God, you walk differently. You speak differently. You rise when others expect you to fall. Ishmael's strength was rooted in that single truth: God sees the unseen. Many people don't realize how deeply Ishmael is tied to today's cultures. Millions of people across the Middle East and North Africa trace their lineage, physically, culturally, or spiritually, back to him. His legacy didn't just stop with a tribe. It expanded into empires, languages, and global traditions. Ishmael's story isn't just in the past. It's alive, breathing in modern nations, influencing the world more than most realize. For centuries, Ishmael and Isaac have been painted as rivals. But the Bible gives us a quiet moment. They buried Abraham together. No arguments. No division. Just two sons honoring their father. That speaks volumes. Maybe they weren't enemies after all. Maybe the world pushed a division that God never intended. What if the real story is about reconciliation? What if Ishmael's role was always meant to be brother, not rival? Ishmael has often been misunderstood. Some paint him as a troublemaker, others as a mistake. But the Bible never calls him either. He was a boy caught in adult decisions, shaped by divine purpose. His journey wasn't about rebellion, it was about endurance. And perhaps the reason he's been overlooked is because his story challenges our ideas about who gets chosen and why. Ishmael proves that God's attention goes beyond our labels. God told Abraham, "I have heard you, and I will bless Ishmael." That's huge. Ishmael's fruitfulness wasn't just for survival, it was for significance. His descendants would not only be many, but influential. Fruitfulness means growth, legacy, and impact. Ishmael reminds us that even outside the spotlight, we can bloom, that blessings aren't limited to one path, and that sometimes the wilderness is the place where fruit really grows. Their story is rare, a mother and son duo facing exile, hunger, and despair, yet surviving together. Hagar and Ishmael's bond is one of the strongest in Scripture. They cried together, prayed together, and rose together. And in a time when women and children were often silenced, their voices still echo. Their love was fierce, protective, and holy. And through their journey, we see that family, even when broken, can still be beautiful. Ishmael teaches us that God's plans are bigger than our assumptions. That even in rejection, there is purpose. That even in wilderness, there is blessing. His life reminds us that divine love is not reserved for perfect people, but poured out on the wandering, the weeping, the waiting. Ishmael is proof that God's reach goes further than we think, and his promises, even when delayed, are never denied. Can you imagine the pain of being sent away by your own father? Ishmael wasn't just leaving home. He was leaving behind a part of himself. Abraham, the man who raised him, now had to let him go. It wasn't because of hate, but because of a divine plan neither of them could fully understand. Still, for Ishmael, this must have felt like betrayal, like rejection. Yet it was in that pain that a new identity began to form, one that wasn't defined by being Abraham's son alone, but by being known and seen by God himself. When Ishmael and Hagar wandered the desert, they reached a breaking point. The water ran out.
Hope ran dry.
Hagar placed Ishmael under a bush, unable to watch him die. But in that hopeless moment, God did something extraordinary. He showed up. Not with judgment, but with provision. A well appeared. Life returned. Ishmael was not forgotten. God doesn't abandon his promises, and he certainly doesn't abandon his children, especially the ones crying alone in the wilderness. Ishmael grew up to become a man of the bow, living in the wilderness of Paran. This wasn't just about hunting, it was about mastering survival. Every arrow he loosed was forged in hardship. Every skill he learned in the wild came from necessity. Ishmael didn't just live. He adapted, endured, and became a man of strength. While others had comfort, Ishmael had courage. His bow became a symbol of determination in the face of abandonment. God told Abraham that Ishmael would be blessed, not with a covenant, but with greatness. His descendants would become 12 princes. Nations would come from him. It wasn't second best, it was different. Ishmael's blessing wasn't a backup plan. It was a unique promise. And sometimes, the blessings that don't look like what we expect are the ones that truly shape the world. Ishmael's line was never forgotten by God. It was written into destiny. Most of us stop reading Ishmael's story too early. We see the exile. We miss the legacy. But Ishmael lived a full life. He married, raised children, and became the father of multitudes. His story isn't just in Genesis. It's alive in traditions, cultures, and faiths across the globe. Just because his story is short on the page doesn't mean it was small. Sometimes the most powerful legacies are the ones that history tries to overlook, but God makes unforgettable. In Genesis 25, something beautiful happens. Abraham dies, and both Isaac and Ishmael come together to bury him. This moment is powerful. There's no mention of argument. No sign of rivalry. Just unity. Ishmael could have stayed away. But instead, he chose to honor the man who both raised and released him. It's a subtle, powerful picture of healing, of forgiveness, of respect. And it reminds us that even broken relationships can be honored in sacred moments. When we say patriarchs of the Bible, we usually think Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. But what about Ishmael? He, too, fathered nations. He, too, received divine promises. His sons became princes. His family multiplied across continents. Ishmael was a patriarch, not by tradition, but by calling. And perhaps the world's dismissal of his role only proves how easy it is to overlook greatness when it doesn't fit our expectations. Was it fair that Ishmael was sent away? Maybe not by human standards. But God doesn't operate on favoritism. He operates on purpose. Ishmael's life shows that being outside the covenant didn't mean being outside of grace. God didn't owe Ishmael anything, yet he gave him water in the desert, nations for sons, and his eternal presence. Ishmael reminds us that divine justice is not about equal outcomes. It's about holy intentions. Even today, echoes of Ishmael are everywhere, in language, in faith, in geography. Millions look to him as a spiritual father. The traditions of hospitality, strength, endurance, and family in many Arab cultures carry his fingerprints. And yet, most of the world doesn't know the full story. Ishmael's influence isn't just biblical, it's global. And recognizing that opens the door to understanding more of God's diverse and complex work in history. Ishmael's story is more than history, it's an invitation. Have you ever felt overlooked, cast aside, or written off?
So, did he?
But God met him in the wilderness, gave him purpose, and made him a father of nations. If God could turn Ishmael's exile into legacy, he can do the same with your journey. This isn't just a Bible story, it's a living message. No one is too forgotten for grace. And no one is beyond the reach of divine purpose. Ishmael lived between two worlds, the lineage of Abraham and the wilderness of Paran. He knew the God of his father, but also the survival of the desert. This dual identity made him complex. He wasn't just an exile, he was a bridge. A bridge between promises and struggle, between chosen lineage and divine inclusion. Ishmael reminds us that we don't need to fit neatly into one world to matter in God's story. Sometimes, the ones between two worlds carry the most powerful witness. We often talk about Ishmael's story, but what about Hagar, his mother? She was a slave, a woman with no voice in her society, and yet, she's the first person in the Bible to give God a name. El Roi, the God who sees me. Her courage shaped Ishmael's journey. Her strength carved the path for survival. And through her, Ishmael inherited not only the wilderness, but the revelation that God watches over the unseen. Hagar's faith gave Ishmael roots, even in the desert. Strangely, Ishmael never speaks a recorded word in the Bible. No long prayers. No complaints. Just silence. But that silence isn't emptiness. It's endurance. His life tells a louder story than his voice. Sometimes the most powerful testimonies aren't in what we say, but in how we live, survive, and grow despite what we've lost. Ishmael's quiet presence through pain, rejection, and blessing speaks volumes, louder than many words ever could. Just like Jacob would later have 12 sons, Ishmael also fathered 12 sons, each becoming a tribal prince. These sons became founders of powerful clans. It's a striking parallel. Both lines came from Abraham, both formed nations. But while Isaac's line birthed Israel, Ishmael's gave rise to a vast Arab world. The symmetry is no accident. It shows that God's purposes run wide. Ishmael's lineage wasn't an afterthought. It was an intentional thread in the tapestry of history. When God promised Abraham that Ishmael would become a great nation, it seemed unlikely, especially in the wilderness. But the desert wasn't a curse, it was a cradle. In that harsh place, Ishmael grew strong, his sons multiplied, and cities rose. God doesn't need ideal conditions to fulfill his promise. Even the wilderness can become the soil for nations. And in Ishmael's case, the desert became proof that God keeps his word, even when all odds say otherwise. Ishmael didn't carry the covenant of Israel, but he still carried faith. He knew God, encountered angels, witnessed miracles. His life challenges the idea that only one path carries divine favor. Ishmael reminds us that God speaks across boundaries, reaches beyond chosen lines, and blesses those who seek him, even outside traditional roles. His story expands our vision of God's reach and shows that faith outside the covenant is still faithfully seen by God. The day Abraham died, Ishmael came back. No bitterness, no war, just honor. Alongside Isaac, he helped bury their father. That moment, quiet, respectful, sacred, spoke of peace, of reconciliation. Sometimes, God brings people full circle. Ishmael's return wasn't just about closure. It was about healing. It was about honoring roots, even when the journey has been hard. And in that burial scene, we see not just the end of Abraham's life, but the redemption of Ishmael's. Though often left out of Sunday school stories, Ishmael's descendants play a huge role in the religious landscape today. billions trace cultural, spiritual, or genealogical roots to him. He is considered a patriarch not only in the Bible but also in Islam. Ishmael reminds us that spiritual legacy isn't confined to one narrative. God's fingerprints stretch across cultures, and Ishmael's story stands as a bridge between the faiths. A forgotten son, but a remembered legacy. In a world divided by background, belief, and history, Ishmael's story calls us to humility. He teaches us that rejection doesn't erase purpose, and that divine plans include even those we overlook. He reminds us that faith exists in many forms, and that unity, even among differences, is possible. Ishmael may not have had a covenant like Isaac, but his life carried weight, dignity, and impact. His journey challenges us to see others the way God sees them, with value and promise. Why should we remember Ishmael? Because his story is still unfolding. Because forgotten people matter. Because God's promises are not limited to one tribe or one tradition. Ishmael matters because he is a living testimony that exile doesn't mean abandonment, it means redirection. His journey tells us that no life is wasted and no destiny is too far gone. Ishmael still matters because through him, we're reminded that God writes beautiful stories, even in the wilderness. As the generations passed, Ishmael's descendants carried his strength, his faith, and his resilience. The 12 sons he fathered became tribal leaders, their names echoing across ancient records and modern lands. His legacy wasn't one of bitterness, but of building. He may have started in the wilderness, but his name became rooted in cities and civilizations. And long after his death, his story lived on, proving that sometimes the ones history overlooks are the ones who shape it most. Though Ishmael isn't a central figure in every prophetic book, his presence is acknowledged. Later prophets understood that Ishmael's story carried implications for the nations around Israel. His name would represent more than a person. It represented peoples, tensions, alliances, and promises. His descendants lived beside Israel, sometimes in conflict, sometimes in peace, but always as part of the story. The prophets never erased Ishmael. Instead, they reminded Israel of its shared past. Many scholars trace the rise of Arab peoples to Ishmael's descendants. His sons became rulers of regions that would eventually evolve into the heart of the Arabian Peninsula. These tribes forged trade routes, developed language systems, and built early societies. Though often disconnected from biblical texts, their origins remain deeply biblical. Ishmael wasn't just a wanderer. He was a founder. Arabia didn't rise from nowhere. It rose from the footsteps of Abraham's firstborn. For centuries, Ishmael's story has cried out, not for revenge, but for recognition. He was not the villain.
He was not the mistake.
He was a son, a brother, a patriarch. His life was marked not by hatred, but by survival and grace. The world often chooses favorites, but God includes the rejected. And today, Ishmael's story speaks to millions who feel cast aside. In Ishmael, they see hope, proof that forgotten beginnings can lead to historic endings. Ishmael and Isaac, two brothers, two destinies, one father. Their paths diverged, yet remained parallel. Isaac was the son of the promise. Ishmael was the son of endurance. Both became nations. Both buried Abraham. Their lives prove that God can work through both covenant and courage. They were never enemies in the eyes of heaven, only in the eyes of men. And if these two could reunite in peace, maybe there's hope yet for unity among their descendants today. The Bible tells us that Ishmael died at the age of 137. His life was long, full, and impactful. But is that where his story ends? Not quite. His influence grew after his death, as his children expanded their territories and formed the cultural backbone of much of the Middle East. Even in death, Ishmael's story wasn't over. His legacy rippled through time, shaping faiths, peoples, and nations. Sometimes, the story after death is the one that changes the world. Today, Ishmael remains spiritually relevant. In Christianity, his story teaches endurance and divine mercy. In Islam, He's seen as a forefather of prophets and a man of obedience. In Judaism, he's a reminder of the power of God's promises. Across faiths, Ishmael invites us to see God's work beyond borders. He asks us to open our eyes to the broader family of Abraham, to recognize that God's grace is not restricted to a single story, but offered to all. Being Abraham's son meant standing in the shadow of greatness. But Ishmael never let that shadow define him. He forged his own way, built his own people, and honored the God of his father. His greatness didn't come from being first or favored. It came from his resilience. The world often forgets those in the shadows, but God doesn't. And Ishmael's story is a reminder that greatness can grow in the wilderness and legacy can bloom in the silence. What does Ishmael's life ultimately teach us? That no one is too forgotten to be chosen. That no distance is too far for God to reach. That silence can be strength, and rejection can become a platform for renewal. His story is not one of anger, but of answered prayers. Not of isolation, but of impact. Ishmael stands as proof that even if the world forgets your name, heaven remembers your journey. And sometimes, that's all that matters. As we close this story, one truth remains. Ishmael was never forgotten. Not by God, not by history, and not by those who seek truth. His life reminds us that the wilderness is not the end, but often the beginning of something divine. So if you've ever felt overlooked, know this. Ishmael's journey is your encouragement. And if you believe in the power of stories, in the love of Jesus, and the beauty of Scripture, then share, and subscribe to the Bible Stories. Let's keep these untold stories alive.